this past Shabbat, Batya and I hosted 2 medical students from Queen's University in your part of the world, one a friend of hers, and they are here on a program volunteering in Wolfson Hospital in Cholon, just outside of Tel Aviv, part of the program called Save a Child's Heart, which started in the 90s, an Israeli project. It was fascinating listening to them describe their adventures in the operating rooms, even if just observing. But this is a project that has welcomed thousands of children who need cardiac surgery. And they've come from Africa, Iraq, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. So Shabbat, as wonderful as it was having these friends here, as you know, was a very tense Shabbat, which fell over into Tisha B'Av. And I actually was reminded of one of the rituals at our Pesach Seder, when we're reciting the plagues, the Eser Makot, and we take a drop of wine out of our glass for each plague. And that's meant to symbolize that, yes, we are grateful that we survived, but we are not happy that even our enemy had to die, but we are grateful. So one of the terrorist leaders who fortunately left this world before he was able to carry out the attack that he was planning for us, was responsible, obviously, for the deaths of more than a few people. But they interviewed on TV one such woman, a Miriam Peretz, that perhaps you've heard of, an incredible woman. She even actually ran, if that's what you do, for the presidency of our country. She lost not one, but 2 sons in different wars. And this terrorist was responsible for at least one of their deaths. And she used the same terminology. She was grateful for the justice that had been done, but not happy, but very, very grateful. We pray that the quiet should remain. Okay, so last week we asserted that children as children, in the words of Janusz Korczak, are invited to participate in the life of society and are to be encouraged to simultaneously absorb our tradition, their heritage, and sing their own individual songs simultaneously. The past with their own creations. And today, we look at a period in one's life where he or she is uncertain as to what his or her song is. And that's very unsettling if we can remember going back. Not that far. Adolescence, Erik Erikson, the psychologist, tells us, is the key time in identity formation. Adolescents are eager to be affirmed by peers, to be confirmed by teachers, and to be inspired by worthwhile ways of life. It's a time when adolescents engage in an exploration that's sometimes very trying for parents, an exploration of many ideas and roles, fashions, in order to find a place in society and a sense of internal continuity, because they are so often going from one thing to another. I'll share my screen. I read a text from Sefer Bamidbar, Numbers. These are the journeys. I warn you, it is not very exciting, and I'm saying that intentionally. These are the journeys of the people of Israel who left the land of Egypt by the hand of Moshe and Aaron, according to their hosts. Moshe recorded their goings forth and their journeys by God's word, and these are their journeys and goings forth. They journeyed from Ramses in the first month, on the 15th day of that first month, on the morrow of the Pesach. The people of Israel went forth proudly in the plain view of all of Egypt. The people of Israel journeyed from Ramses and encamped at Sukkot, which is also the name of a place. They journeyed from Sukkot and encamped at Etam, that is at the edge of the wilderness. And the list goes on to detail a total of 42 stations from the time that they left Egypt until they reached the land of Canaan, the promised land. Why do you think the Torah does not simply tell us the place of origin and the ultimate final destination? Why? Why does it feel the need to list each tachana, each station?
I think the journey is very important.
Yes. Esther, you had said you didn't think you'd be back yet, but I'm glad to hear your voice.
Yeah,
Sorry for your loss.
Yeah, thank you. I changed the appointment from today to yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that
yes, the journey.
The journey is important, and also he uses the places that they pass instead of booking them on things that they did wrong at each one of those places. He just hints at them by mentioning the place.
Yes, that is definitely another issue. Why he does that. Anybody want to say anything else about the significance? It is the journey. And why? What is the message that's being given here? That the journey is
not smooth.
Well, it's not smooth. There are some commentators that say actually God was compassionate because he let them rest. There are other commentaries, but the one that we're interested in today is the one that says it's not just the destination. Just as Korchak shared with us last week, with his love for children, that childhood is not just a stop on the way to something more important. The Torah is also saying that process is very, very important, despite the fact that most would agree that the period of adolescence is usually much more trying than childhood. So Rashi, one of our favorite Torah commentaries, says the following in him trying to answer this question. Rav Tanchuma, Rashi says, gave an explanation for it, this listing. He compared God to a king who had a son who was ill. He took his son to a distant place in order to have him healed. When they returned, the father began recounting all the steps of the journey. He said to his son, "Here we slept, here we gave thanks, here you laid down your head," etc. Why did the father point out all the stations toward the recovery? For a similar reason. But what does this, Rashi's explanation, add to what we just said about process?
Well, every step in the journey is important, but it's not the end. So even the difficult ones, maybe especially, but each place is a place that's a launching point for a new destination, but it's a marking of what you've passed.
Absolutely. And I think in this case also, it's important that the son and similarly people in the son's position realize what they've achieved, that they've gone through these different steps.
Isn't that why we say respect for the elders because of experience?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you said.
I said, isn't that why we say respect for elders because of experience?
Well, yeah, they have gone through much and life's experience. There is nothing like that.
Bracha, it also strikes
Brenda.
me. It also strikes me that it's not just the process of going from the place and each place being a step on the journey, but what he's saying is, here we slept, here we gave thanks, that there were different things that they had to do along the way to achieve that journey. So each step was not only a step, but it had a purpose for each of those steps.
And they were actively involved in doing it. Exactly. Even in the Midbar, in the desert, and when going back to when they crossed the sea, you'll remember the Midrash, how until somebody finally jumped into the water, that symbolized the fact that they couldn't just rely on God's help anymore. Yes, Brenda, absolutely. Marlene?
It's very interesting because one of the things that I've often said to my own children is that, especially if they are sort of on this searching journey and having some trouble with it, I very often have said to them, some people go from point A to point B with no stops along the way, but other people have to go to point C, D, E, F, whatever, and see what happens at that point. And when they finally get to B, they generally are more successful than those who go in a straight line. And it very often has made them feel much better about having these doubts about what they were doing and where they were going.
I agree fully.
And also, Bracha, I think there's another aspect. When the father says to his son, "Here we slept," he's reinforcing and he's making a memory. So here it's like, it's almost like a bracha in a way. You acknowledge this time and place and remember it.
Nice.
Isn't it also important for a parent to show the child that accomplishment comes with hard work or hardship?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're going to return to that in a little while. So, a social clinical psychologist, Wendy Mogul, and Bible scholar and educator, Erica Brown, who I have mentioned on more than one occasion, both perceive the similarity independently between adolescence and the state of Bnei Israel, the Israelites, in the desert. Mogul sees the journey in the desert, the Midbar, as the transition from childhood in the Egyptian slavery to maturity in the promised land. Just as adolescence of Bnei Israel, the Israelites, had to be long and difficult, it was intentional. It had to be long and difficult enough for it to really take. And parents, Mogul says, need to know no shortcuts, literally and metaphorically, are allowed. And she continues here in saying, raising teenagers has always been hard. It has to be hard. Judaism teaches us that the agonizing transition of adolescence is all part of what is called tsar gidul banim, the necessary pain of raising children. I know or knew from my professional life that most of this pain is caused by the important work teenagers do when they begin to separate from their parents. They move away and establish their own identity, yet at the same time, they long for security and comfort. And she goes on to say, even if she was able to understand this professionally, of course, when it came to her own children, didn't matter what her profession was. And that's not a new concept to us.
But Bracha, what I found with my kids, that when they were teenagers, they knew everything. And
that certainly is part of an adolescent.
And that's a difficult part to deal with.
Very difficult. We are going to return to that as well. Now, let's listen to what Erica Brown says, brings in something I find very fascinating in her talking about this adolescence parallel to our journey in the desert. Burton Bernstein, in his book Sinai, The Great and Terrible Wilderness, quotes a 15th century monk and pilgrim, Felix Fabry, who described the Sinai this way: every day, indeed every hour, you come into new country of a different nature, with different conditions of atmosphere and soil, with hills of a different build and color, so that you are amazed at what you see and long for what you will see next. So she is sharing with us what he is expressing regarding what we just said, that adolescents are constantly exploring and within the same day going from one emotion and one thought to another. And then she goes on. There is another kind of wild that no book on the wilderness can ignore. It is the wilderness within each person that reflects in a rugged landscape. And in fact, the Torah also gives very detailed descriptions of the topography. Reflects in a rugged landscape is simply the projection of man's deepest emotional fears onto nature. Nature for the ancient Israelites was not merely outside of the people, but profoundly within them, unsure of their mysterious destination, the land that I will show you, unequipped to deal with the uncertainties, the ancient Israelites fought against each other and their leadership. So going back to what I think Esther said, that they're torn. It's a mystery what's going to be, but they're not willing to be comforted by what a parent might be telling them or what a Moshe might be sharing with them, and tend to reject it, which is very hurtful to those of us who feel that we have the experience and they should rely on us.
Isn't there another complication? If a child is used to a parent forgiving them so many things, and then suddenly they don't, you know? Like with
Absolutely. That's why it is difficult, because on the one hand, they are looking to break away, and we'll discuss that a little bit more, what that leads them to do, what kind of behavior. On the other hand, they still do want that comfort in a way. Now, let me ask you, what is our first and deepest terror as a very young child? And it relates to what we've just said. Think, I'll give you a moment. What is our first and deepest terror as a very young child? Anyone?
The dark.
The dark, Bev. Anyone else?
Getting lost.
Separation.
I'm sorry, I heard Marlene and a male voice.
Getting lost.
Getting lost.
Losing your parents.
Separation.
Losing your parents. Separation.
Yeah.
Okay, separation, anxiety, especially from mother. How many times have we pictured a child being able to play, but every 5 minutes looking up to see if mama's still there? Yeah?
You know, Bracha,
Okay.
it's the same thing when you are teaching kindergarten and the parent brings the child in, the child cries as long as the mother is around.
Well,
That's okay. Is that for
I
guilt?
remember, it's Michael. I
Michael,
remember
yes.
when I was probably 3 years old. I'm guessing at my age.
come on, you remember that?
I was still in a crib, okay? I was in a crib, and I will never forget this nightmare. I was
Go ahead.
walking with my mother, and we went onto this bus. No words were spoken. She smiled at me. She told me, like, to motion to sit there. Then she walked out of the bus. The bus started to go, and she waved goodbye to me. And I'm in the bus, and I'm screaming, and I woke up screaming. I will never forget that nightmare. And I was maybe 3 years old.
Well,
Wow.
now we understand you, Michael.
that is the greatest.
That's terrible.
Fear of a
Oh
child.
my God.
That is the greatest fear of a child, to lose their parent.
Wow. Did you tell that to your mother? Were you able to share the nightmare? Do you remember? No? No? Doesn't hear? Okay. Now, so as Michael's telling us, are you hearing me?
We do, I do.
Okay. No, you're all looking kind of, okay. The stable presence of parents in our early years gives us a basic sense of trust in life. We've confirmed that. But then, as we get older, we have to learn to make our own way in the world. Now, let's look at our next thinker, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Those are the years of searching, as he discusses adolescence, and in some cases, rebellion. To go back to what we said a few minutes ago, without using that word. They are what make adolescence so fraught. The Hebrew word for youth, the root, nun ayin resh, na'ar, has these connotations of awakening and shaking. We begin to define ourselves by reference to our friends, our peer group, rather than our family. And often there is a tension between the generations. The literary theorist Harold Bloom wrote two fascinating books, The Anxiety of Influence and Maps of Misreading, in which, in Freudian style, he argued that this is marvelous, that strong poets make space for themselves by deliberately misinterpreting or misunderstanding their predecessors. Otherwise, if you were really in awe of the great poets that came before you, you would be stymied by a sense that everything that could be said has been said, and better than you could possibly do. Creating the space we need to be ourselves often involves an adversarial relationship to those who came before us, and that includes our parents.
Wow.
So sometimes suggesting what happens is you want to break away, and that's a natural, normal action to take. But it's hard. So what he suggests as he continues, I haven't brought it completely, is that sometimes an adolescent will make the parent almost into a monster. So in that way, it's easier to move away. Think about that. Whether you did that to perceived your parents, or whether you think you were perceived that way, on different levels, of course. Now, I want to ask you, what really makes adolescence so difficult, that period of time, so difficult and challenging? And there are at least, I believe, 5 causes. Now, you can divide your answer, and I'm seeking answers from you. What makes it difficult for the adolescent, and what makes it incredibly difficult for his or her parent? Please, anyone.
Well, there are physical changes that take place in puberty, etc.
Yes.
One thing. By the way, I'm
Elliot.
glad you mentioned Harold Bloom. That was my wife. God took my wife 8 years ago, but Harold Bloom was her first cousin.
Oh,
wow.
I knew that. Okay.
Well, I think also there's psychological development. I call it individuation, and I don't think that's an easy thing to do. I think it's a struggle, and there are so many different avenues, and there are so many different lures, and potential landmines, and good positive peaks. I mean, I think it's a very rough path as an adolescent.
Absolutely, Merle.
Think that-
Absolutely.
Part of the problem with parents is that we often know.
They leave
from
you on a
early-
bus. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry,
It's like
go
that
ahead.
In teenage years, we sort of know a lot of what our kids are going to be going through since we've done it ourselves. And we know sometimes, we see right away if they're making a bad decision. And yet we know we can't forbid them because they're too old. And if you tell them, listen to us, we know what we're talking about, we've done it, they don't want to hear that. So it's, you have to take on sort of a position where you're there, you listen, you support, and you try to ask questions of them to get them to see what you want them to see. And it's extremely difficult.
Absolutely.
And thank God I was a teacher, and I learned to do this with other kids. So when my kids came along, I really tried to divorce myself from them in the sense of, when these difficult times, I tried to treat them like my students rather than my own kids. If you do your own kids, you can't deal with it. If I would treat them like my students, I could.
I agree.
I don't know if this is on
Linda,
top.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know if this is on topic or not, but
I'll let you know.
yeah, okay. When I was growing up, I really have thought about this a lot. My parents gave me and my brothers absolute trust throughout the years. They never, there weren't curfews, there weren't demands. They just gave us trust. And I think that that's an important thing. If you say to a teenager, I trust your judgment, then that teenager, or at least it was true for us, we would never have done anything to disappoint our parents because they put so much trust in us. But that was just my experience. I don't know.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I think that teenagers have too many pressures. There is the values that the teachers give them, is the values from home. There is trying to find themselves. So they're torn in so many different directions that there is no wonder that they are under pressure.
That's an interesting point, in that if it sounds as if you're saying that the values that are given at school might be different from the values given at home. And so do I listen to them? Do I listen to them? Interesting. Anyone else?
Well, it strikes me that adolescence, because it's a time of transition, I would also say that transition is very difficult, because in some ways they're not grown up, and in other ways they are grown up. And I think it's difficult for a parent to see the more grown up components and let go of the child. And it's also difficult for the adolescent who's torn between those states.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This Wendy Mogul, she actually says that one of the issues that she found in her practice were parents transferring their disappointments onto their teenagers, wanting their child to live their dreams.
Right, this is true.
And letting them also sense from their parents what path will be considered in their eyes successful.
Oh.
Now,
Okay.
I'm thinking of, I know of a couple of families that the parents needed some assistance, professional assistance in learning to accept what their high school graduate was looking to pursue. Whether it was somebody, the particular case I'm talking about is somebody who wanted to go on into the music profession. And a brilliant student, a former student of mine, and they were opposed. But bottom line, they were opposed because they were nervous about, is he going to make a living? Is he going to make a living? But what happened is they came to understand it. And fortunately, he's gone on to be very successful. Anyone else?
You know what, Bracha? I think that things are actually much more difficult for the adolescent today than, Linda was talking about her own teenage years. We didn't have as many choices to make.
Yes.
And we also had a different kind of relationship with our parents. I mean, our parents told us to do something and we did it. They were the ultimate lawgivers. And we didn't communicate with our parents in the same way that we've encouraged our children to communicate with us. And they get to a point, and I very often have said, and I've said this to some of my friends, that they are not going to follow the scripts that we have written. And now those scripts can go off in 55,000 directions as opposed to 55.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think there is another big problem. An adolescent cannot expect to understand the reasoning that the parent has. If I'll take a religious importance. If a parent says to the kid, you have to love God, and the kid says, I never met God, how can I love him? So it's just a small example of the gap between the parents and the child.
Well, that's an issue of, what's going on in the home from day one. Absolutely. Stephen, I see your hand.
Well,
Stephen?
nobody yet has mentioned the one major factor that has changed the life of
You're breaking up. I'm
you
sorry, Stephen. Try again.
today. Humanity, it's been good for humanity, but it's been very changing for the life of a teenager. And that is what we're doing now, the internet. The influence of the internet is phenomenal on the development of a youth. Growing up, I remember, who did we know? We knew our neighbors, the kids in the neighborhood. We knew our own community. Now, the whole world is open to these 10-year-olds, never mind 15-year-olds. In a way, it challenges the parents and it exposes them to hatred and pressure from other sources. That is the biggest influence negatively to deal with for teenagers.
Very right on. Something that you did not have to deal with. Absolutely. Abraham Joshua Heschel blames parents for at least two wrongs in this area. One, he doesn't feel that parents these days sufficiently expose our adolescents to life's trials. Now, that can be seen on different levels. It could go back to what Marlene seemed to be hinting at in part, also that demands of parents on adolescents is very different these days than the demands, not requests, demands that our parents put on us. All good, but there were certain expectations, whether it was something to do in the house, a chore, or I think you probably understand what I mean. Of course, naturally, in an individual family's life, there are challenges, unfortunately, that arise. Now, we won't go in today in the differences between adolescence in Israel and adolescence outside of Israel, because there are differences because of the circumstances. Second issue that Heschel has is that parents, as adults, tolerate things that are ignoble. So how do they expect their children not to? And he says the following: we have denied our young people the knowledge of the dark side of life. They see a picture of ease, play, and fun. Now, we won't generalize, That life includes hardships, illness, grief, even agony, that many hearts are sick with bitterness, resentfulness, envy, are facts of which young people have hardly an awareness. They do not feel morally challenged. They do not feel called upon. At the same time, weakened by self-indulgence. And by the way, adolescents in Israel can feel that as well, together with the other. He breaks down easily under hardship. Demands which were made of the individual in earlier periods are now considered excessive. Self-discipline is obsolescent, self-denial unhygienic, metaphysical problems irrelevant. The terms of reference are emotional release and suppression, with little regard for remorse and responsibility. How can we expect the young to be noble if we ourselves continue to tolerate the ignoble? Now, how do you feel about what Heschel says here?
To me, it comes to the point that parents don't give children any responsibility.
Okay, anyone else?
I think he actually, Heschel lived before the helicopter parenting generation, but he's bang on with a lot of the things that he's saying, because and if you're a teacher and in a school, you know the difference between parents today and how they react to their child being disciplined at school, their child having a problem at school, losing a game. Children are not allowed to lose. That, I mean, it just doesn't happen. Everything winds up in a tie. So how do you know what's going on out there in the world, in the real world?
Beautiful, Marlene, absolutely. Yeah, I see it as a parent and as a teacher. I saw it.
Me too.
Bracha,
Yes.
how about the demands made on a child growing up in a rural environment compared with an urban environment? Would they not be different? Or what about demands made on a child who might have lost a parent? Maybe the older ones would have more responsibility.
Absolutely. All those circumstances would cause for different atmospheres, environments, and expectations
But Elliot,
within a family.
But Elliot, you don't have to lose a parent. You could see in any family, some children take up more responsibility than others.
For sure. Now, Heschel is going to go on now and call for awareness and actions. 7 points that I put before you. Self-respect is the fruit of discipline. The sense of dignity grows with the ability to say no to oneself. 2, and if you have a reaction, please, as usual, stop me. 2, the cardinal sin of our educational philosophy is that we have asked too little. Some of what we've just said. Its modest standards are unfair to the potentialities of man. Enhance our concept of man. 3, are we, he asked, truly committed to the notion that ideals and values vary and alter in accordance with changing conditions? Is there nothing that's transcendent? 4, together with adjustment to society, we must cultivate a sense for injustice, impatience with vulgarity, and that can be Stephen's internet, a capacity for moral indignation, a will to readjust society itself, when it becomes complacent and corrupt. 5, teach the pupil to resist conformity. On the one hand, we say adolescent is looking for, as Merle said, individuation, but they tend to want to do what their peers are doing. They shouldn't feel that need. 6, I would suggest that we evolve a new type, I love this, of examination paper, one in which the answers are given and the questions are to be supplied by the student.
Like Jeopardy.
He was always looking for us to wonder, to question.
But
There was a philosophy test at Yale University many, many years ago, and the professor just put on the exam, why? And one of the students wrote back, why not?
I love it.
7, we need the resurrection of the parent as a person worthy of being revered. Now, I'll let you on your own think about that. You know, what kind of models are we? Heschel was sometimes hesitant in believing that we were living our lives. As he said, how can we expect of our children if we ourselves are guilty of such and such? But that is a consistency and the lifestyle that we can give them from day one is essential, even if they're going to go their own way. But at least we have given them certain baggage and then let them choose.
Well, I always told my kids, give me actions, don't give me words.
Okay. Now,
that applies to number 7.
absolutely. Now, how do we approach the adolescent? We have acknowledged that the adolescent has a need to rebel. Does that imply, though, a moratorium on educating? American educational thinker John Dewey shares the following parable. A man traveling in an unfamiliar region comes to a branching of the road. Almost sounds like Robert Frost's poem.
Mm-hmm.
Having no sure knowledge to fall back on, he is brought to a standstill of hesitation and suspense. Which road is right? And how shall his perplexity be resolved? There are but 2 alternatives. He must either blindly and arbitrarily take his course, trusting to luck for the outcome, or he must discover grounds for the conclusion that a given road is right. Jewish thinker Michael Rosenak explains, Dewey's image of the branching of the road suggests a polemic against the traditionalist way of thinking. There's one way, it's from the past, and that will solve even today's problems. As if Dewey saw that everything old is dated, outdated. In fact, Rosenak shares with us, the narratives of our Tanakh, the Bible, the narratives, as opposed to the authoritarian rules, have the potential to captivate even the rebellious adolescent. Searching, wandering minds will see themselves in biblical episodes. If I let you, you could sit here and think of such episodes as they read of fear, anger, uncertainty, evasion, egos, and they will see calls in the Tanakh for thinking afresh. Simply put, Rosenack says the following: the Torah is not only the warmth of identity and of certain and stated norm, but also a challenge at the crossroads. Two concluding texts, again from our two women. Wendy Mogul says the following: life with teens will be more fun for you if you can derive at least some entertainment value from the experience. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam mishaneh habriot is the Hebrew prayer you say when you see an exceptionally beautiful or funny looking person or animals. It means, thank you, God, for varying the creatures. Now, she says, you don't always have to mean it or believe it. But if you can get yourself in a mindset, and this might be too late for most of us sitting here, but it would have been healthy if we can take it, wow, that's extraordinary. It's interesting. It will pass. But you can think of it, this bracha, as a mantra for parents who are learning to accept and appreciate the exotic creatures their teenage children have become. Did everyone react that way at that time?
I doubt it.
And yet here we are. And our second, Erica Brown, shares with us a concept developed by Chip and Dan Heath, two brothers who co-authored the book Switch: How to Change Things When Change is Hard.
Mhm.
The concept is take one goal at a time. Don't think of an entire lifetime, but take one goal at a time. Create a picture of what life will look like when we achieve a particular goal. And she brings this. We want what we might call a destination postcard. A vivid picture from the near-term future that shows what could be possible. When someone sends you a postcard, what they are saying in essence is, wish you were here. This is a beautiful place to me. Look at the image on the front. This is what it would look like if you would actually join me. Now, do you send a postcard like that to an adolescent, or will it be a waste of a stamp? What Brown says is that just as we mentioned last week, that one of the obligations of a parent is to ensure that your child can swim, literally, but more significantly, metaphorically, knows how to deal with crises, as Heschel commands us to do, that similarly, even with an adolescent, you will have the benefit of an earlier experience if the parent takes on the responsibility of creating a scene of what life can be like. And you, my child, though, you choose your own path to get to the picture on the postcard.
I think, but
In other words, that as much as we have to as Michael expressed, give our adolescents their freedom, or else they'll become invalids. It's very hard because it's not that we want them to take on our lives, but any values I would expect that we've decided to give them as they're growing up are values that we think are going to be beneficial to them. And because we're adults, we have that sense. So they might choose not to follow that, but it is our responsibility. Brown and Mogul and Rosenak and Dewey and Heschel are telling us that we don't just say, again, adolescence is a stage to get through, but there's still ways of reaching an adolescent or making them remember what we've given them in the past, hoping that that bottom line gives them a sense of security. But that's a parental responsibility from day one.
I see it a little differently. As a parent,
Yes.
The child knows that he needs you, but the child also likes to know that he is needed. And what I read in the last paragraph is when the parent says, if you were here, the picture is going to be complete, is showing the parent's need for the child, which makes the child feel very good that the parents needs him in the picture.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think as parents, we understand you, that we do need our children, not just to help us with things, but on an existential level, but it's also essential for us to give them a sense of what they give us and the world.
I know that since my husband died, my daughter feels that she has to call me twice every day. I enjoy the call, but I know that she feels very good that she can do it.
Yes, okay. Gloria. Gloria, you're muted. Daniel, can you help or no?
There, can you hear me now?
There, now we hear you. Yes.
I've been listening to this whole discussion, and I think there's one thing we haven't really mentioned, and that's the emphasis of peer pressure. At this age, they have a lot of friends, and a lot of friends have different ideas, and whether they're in conflict with their parents about what's coming up, or in conflict with their friends, or within themselves saying, this isn't what I should be doing, but I better go along with it, or I will be, ostracized from the group or what have you. And I think that is the point, that we have to be pretty much open with our kids to hear what's bothering them and have them feel comfortable enough that they could say, well, I don't know, this is what's going on. I don't think it's the right thing to do. What do you think I should do? How shall I handle it? So I think that's
absolutely, Gloria. Sure. Peer pressure, absolutely a real issue. Anyone else? Something we haven't said?
And of course, today they've got the internet to deal with today, and doing all the social media, and it's so prominent in their lives. Some kids walk around with a cell phone, and even when you're talking to them, they're checking their email. But going on some of these social media like TikTok, which is really abhorrent, some of the things that are on there. And this
How do you know that?
You know what? It's very interesting. I happened to receive something on TikTok, and I was thinking, how can people even read this stuff?
Yes.
So it's very dominant in their lives and a huge control on their lives.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. All technology, as we said a few weeks ago, can have its pluses, but definitely its minuses. Anyone else? Something we haven't said, or
just want to go back to what was said earlier about, whether that a parent has to be revered. And the word that came to my mind was fear. And I say that only because we have a joke, and Bracha knows about this too. You know, we always said to my mother and father, just a minute, you know, I'll do it in a minute. I mean, this was not a term that was even used in my house, but it's a common term now. Now, is that okay to say just a minute? Is it even permissible to say that, as long as it's done within the next hour or two or day, or I don't know what? But I know that my husband, who comes from a Sephardi background, they were, as children, they weren't even allowed, supposedly, to look their parents straight in the face, or mostly the father. And there was a real element of fear. And, you know, I think everything is about balance. But there's really everything right now in Israel anyway, and I have my connections to people abroad as well. There's something that's very deserving. I don't want to have to work too hard. It doesn't mean that they don't work hard as at a job, but let's take the easier way out. Is that totally wrong? Do we all have to just work and work and work and almost donate? You know, whether it's, and adolescents are working early, you know, they get their summer jobs, etc., and they want to have something that maybe is easier. It's just very, very different today. I'm sort of throwing things out, but it's a culmination of everything that's been discussed. And I just really wanted to add that. So I'm not saying I want my parents, yeah, I want my kids to be scared of me. But there really is something that's got to be in between that. The only other thing I wanted to add, and this is something that my younger daughter, who's 17, in a piece she had to do in high school, and she discussed all these distractions and influences, if we want to call it. What she had to say as a 15-year-old was, parents, be alert and be aware, and sit on your kid's bed in the evening, even if they don't feel like talking, and just be connected so that they really know you're there to support them. And you know what? I'm looking at everybody here, and I also have grandchildren. They may be step, but they're still my grandchildren. And there's so much that we can do for them too. And you know what? I don't care. I say whatever I have to say, and whatever is going to be absorbed, it'll be absorbed, but they know that they can come and talk. They may look at me like I'm crazy that I'm bringing up certain things, but that's okay.
But you know,
So actually,
yeah.
Earl?
I know, I just think, Nechama, I think that the answer in a way is balance. I mean, finding that balance isn't always easy.
No.
You know, I think as somebody with, who has adult children and grandchildren and has raised children, first of all, it is a different generation, let's be honest. But I think that as they get older, I mean, you want them, like, you don't, certainly, revere isn't a word I would use. I would sort of feel that at a certain point it becomes, in a way, a partnership. Like it's not so much a friendship, but you want that back and forth of mutuality and connectivity and respect and, communication and all of that. Like, I don't think I wouldn't want it to be just, from upward, downward. Like, I think there has to be some sort of mosaic involved. And I don't think I think it's a challenge, but I think it's something that, we all should strive for, especially in this world, because it's not going to be the same. I mean, when I went to high school, you would never call a teacher, or a student would be called, by their last name. I mean, now a lot of it is first name basis. I mean, like, when we got married, would we ever think of calling our in-laws by their first names? Not in a gazillion years. And now you wouldn't think of calling them mom and dad. It's, it's whatever. It's Merle and Steve. Like, that's the world we're living in. And is it good, bad? It's different. I don't think it's better or worse. I said something to one of my granddaughters last week on the telephone, and I guess I gave her my honest opinion. She said to me, Bubby, that you're savage. I said, what does savage mean? So it was actually a compliment. She said, you said it the way you said it the way you saw it. And I thought, ooh, okay.
We all learned a new word.
I learned a new term.
Yeah. By the way, Bracha, when my kids were young, I told them there is nothing they cannot say to me, but they have to say it respectfully. And
yes.
One day, my 10-year-old opened her mouth, and I walked out of the room. And she said, Mommy, you told me I have a right to say whatever I want. I said, yes, but you forgot I also have a right. I have the right not to listen.
Okay.
But she never opened her mouth again. That way.
Okay.
It's very important.
I think being a parent today is difficult. I mean, I think it is a challenge. I think it was always a challenge, but I think it's really, I think for all the reasons mentioned before, it's not easy. No, for sure
Yes.
not.
But it's the most wonderful thing in the world also, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
May we all have.
It depends, if we're being truthful, it depends
Marlene?
on the day.
Exactly.
Whoa, Marlene. You're savage, Marlene. Did I learn the word correctly?
Oh, she's
Yeah,
honest.
I think that's the way you, yeah, you use the word correctly, as far as I know anyways. What do I know?
Okay. Everybody, let's pray for a very good week
Peaceful.
with our adolescents and the world.
Yep.
Okay.
Amen.
Amen.
Have a good
Shalom.
week,
Take care.
everyone.
Thank
Feel
you.
good.
Thank you.